WordPress Accessibility Day 2023. How to code for keyboard access in WordPress with speaker Priti Rohra, Chief Accessibility Officer at Barrier Break. This presentation was recorded September 28th, 2023.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day 2023. My name is Jason Ferreira. In my day job, I'm the accessibility lead for consumer products at Dow Jones. But for today, I will be your host. Thank you to everybody who is in this room for joining us for how to code for keyboard access in WordPress with Priti Rohra. A little background on Priti. Priti is a veteran in the field of digital accessibility. A person with low vision, she entered into the digital accessibility world 20 years ago to ensure that the perspective of people with visual impairments was included and their technology needs were met. Soon, she developed a keen interest in finding out how people with other types of disabilities access digital content and what are the technology options available to them. This kickstarted her accessibility journey and helped her become a keen student in the digital accessibility space. Priti also worked with the team on drafting India's national policy for electronic and information communication technology. I think I got that right. And throughout her career, she has been a mentor to many accessibility test engineers, developers, and subject matter experts. One last bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to you, Priti. Attendees, please feel free to add your questions in the Zoom Q&A section, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Use the chat to connect with other attendees, and that way the Q&A will be the easiest place for us to find the questions for after the session. And with that, Priti, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Jason, first of all, for the introduction. Just would like to add to that, I'm a native screen reader user, a person with a lived visual impairment, have low vision. So, if there is a raise of hand, I might not be able to see, but as Jason rightly said, you can share your questions on the chat and I'll be happy to take them towards the end of the session. So today I'm here to talk about how to code for keyboard access in WordPress. Okay. And along the way, we are going to talk about different techniques for ensuring keyboard access. What are the different user groups who will benefit from that? And, what are the tips and tricks that, I would have learned over the years, would love to share with all of you all to make sure accessibility, can be implemented correctly for all user groups. So before we get into today's topic, I'd like to talk a bit about my company. I work as a Chief Accessibility Officer with Barrier Break, and I'm an IAAP CPWA certified. Barrier Break is the leaders, the pioneers in the field of digital accessibility when it comes to India. We started the conversation in India, under the guidance of Shilpi Kapoor, who's the CEO of Barrier Break, more than 2 decades back. There were no listening ears, I could say, at that time, but as the conversation has shifted over the years for digital accessibility, and so is the case in India. So, we've been in this space for more than 18 years to 2 decades. We service clients across the globe, 14 different countries, and we service different types of clients from edtech to government, fintech, health sector, insurance, and so on. At Barrier Break, we believe in the people-first approach. People with disabilities are part of the conversation as well as solution. So when we do accessibility testing, accessible development, document remediation, all the different services that Barrier Break offers, we have people with disabilities who are part of this solutions. This ensures that we would come up with practical recommendations that will not only help our clients meet the conformance needs, but also make sure the user experience for people with disabilities is up to the mark. We have people with disabilities as part of our team, and we would have around 40 to 50% of our staff who have people with lived disabilities. We are, a team of 270 plus accessibility professionals, and we are based out of Mumbai, India. Also, we deliver on the hybrid model, on the remote model. So we accommodate our, time in a way that we can service clients across the globe, be it as a US timeline or Canada or in the European region. So let's get right into our today's topic, which is how to code for keyboard access in WordPress. What are we going to cover here? We're going to talk about what is the importance of keyboard accessibility in brief, understand the challenges that people who use a keyboard will face on the web, how to implement keyboard access through navigation, focus visibility, tabbing order, keyboard operability, and most importantly, focus management. Last but not the least, we'll wrap things up on how to test for keyboard access. Okay. So starting off with importance of keyboard accessibility. Keyboard accessibility is important due to different reasons. Okay, we all use keyboard in some or the other form in our day-to-day life. Obviously, while browsing the web or working on the computer. Okay, but it is a necessity for people with disabilities, people with mobility impairments, people with visual impairments. Keyboard is the only medium through which they would be able to interact with their computers. Not only people with mobility and visual impairments, keyboard is very important also for people, who are power users, who want to efficiently and quickly get their task done. They would generally rely on a keyboard. And it can also help someone whose mouse has stopped working, a situational disability. A keyboard would come in handy. This would all be possible if our solutions are made keeping in mind the requirements of keyboard access. People would fill up forms using a keyboard, navigate and interact with elements using a keyboard. And what keyboard accessibility implementation brings in as an added advantage is that it ensures that when we code for keyboard access, support for other assistive technologies is also taken care of. Things like support for speech recognition systems, support for switch control devices. If your elements, your interactions are keyboard accessible, people using these assistive technologies would also benefit from the same. So about the challenges that people who use a keyboard generally face on the web. Okay? Not all the elements can be navigated with a keyboard. Menus, tooltips, sliders, you can't interact with them with a keyboard. They are only coded to work with a mouse. If I can't get into a menu with a keyboard, how am I supposed to access the different list of products that are available in the products menu? Other types of problems that people would face generally using a keyboard. They can navigate to elements in some parts, but they can't see where they are. The keyboard focus is not visible. Okay. When they are tabbing through different elements, the focus order is not logical. Okay. These are pretty old kind of problems when we think about, and these are, right there when the conversation about web accessibility started with WCAG 1.0. But believe me, these are very much there even today as well. Focus is not managed correctly. Focus goes to non-interactive elements. All these kind of problems people generally encounter when they are, browsing the web using a keyboard. So when it comes to WordPress, accessibility is big title. Okay? There is support for adding alternate text for images. There is support to access the admin panels, using keyboard shortcuts. Even I can control my website using a screen reader and, interact with the admin panel and different controls and configure the settings. There are, from a, website development perspective, there are lots of accessibility themes available, which can be utilized to, create accessible websites. And there are lots of accessibility plugins available to help ensure that we can test for accessibility as well as code different elements which are available via these plugins. We'll not go in detail regarding the themes and plugins, because as all of us know, there are lots and lots of them available, and each one of them has their own merits as well as advantages. So what we are going to focus on is the practices, the techniques which are needed to implement keyboard access, and the 5 different areas that we will cover are keyboard navigation, focus visibility, logical tabbing order, keyboard operability, and focus management. The mantra to success for implementing keyboard access on the web is to use native HTML markup elements. Keyboard access is baked right in. Okay, be it navigation, operability, focus visibility, you got it all covered. Okay, but you and I all know that it is not always possible to use native HTML markup. There are certain custom interactions for which we have to rely on custom components. So let's understand each of these in detail. Start off with keyboard navigation. So keyboard navigation, some fundamentals that we need to be worthy about, to be keeping in mind. All the elements should be navigable with a keyboard. Okay, using the tab key, using the shift tab key, or using the arrow keys. Yes, different components require different interactions. We would cover those later when we talk about keyboard operability and focus management. When we say all the elements should be navigable with a keyboard, I should be able to reach to all the menus, submenus, even the tooltips. Also, things like skip links. One should be able to navigate to the main content, to the navigation sections using the skip links. Okay. Standard interaction methods are tab, shift tab, arrow keys, and so on. Okay. When users are using these keystrokes, they should be able to navigate to different elements. For this to happen correctly, there are certain techniques that we should be keeping in mind. First of all, use native HTML markup. Okay. Secondly, when custom components are used, make sure you make them focusable. So let's first talk about the native HTML elements. The button tag, anchor element, the input tag, select elements, text area, and so on. Now, all of these by default can be navigated using a keyboard. Okay. As a developer, we don't need to do anything extra to make sure that these elements are, can be navigated with a keyboard. In case of an anchor tag, make sure to define the href attribute. As far as breaking the default navigation, yes, if tab index or a negative tab index value is specified, or any scripts are defined, then which will prevent this default behavior of all these elements receiving the tab focus. Otherwise, they are tabbable and focusable by default. When it comes to custom components, we need to specify tab index. Okay. It is important when we create a button or we create an input field using a div tag or a span. Now, they don't receive tab focus by default. we need to specify tab index 0 to make sure that they receive keyboard focus. Yes, tab index 0 is not enough for a custom component. We need to do other stuff as well in order to make them accessible. And we'll talk about that as we go ahead. So when we are navigating on the pages, okay, several issues that are seen in default, like let's take an example of a skip link. When skip links are added on the site and users go in and navigate to it, okay, they would activate the link, in the hope that this will take them directly to the main content or to the navigation section. But what happens in most cases is visually the page scrolls, but programmatically the focus does not move to the respective section. Now, why does this happen? Okay, there are multiple reasons. It can be scripts and it can be your markup as well. Okay, so it is important then when you activate a link, skip link. After that, you press tab again to see programmatically is the focus going there. If it is not, it's time to debug our code and make sure that we are defining ID and the bookmark, hash href attribute correctly. Not only that, if there are any scripts that are associated with our skip links, now those need to be worked on as well. So here's an example wherein the barrier break website, the top navigation, here's under about a section, a work with barrier break option is selected. Okay, now all these options, whether the top navigation as well as the submenu options, all are tabbable and focusable with the keyboard. What we have done, no rocket science. It is basic HTML markup. Yes, since these are expandable and collapsible menus, so JavaScript does come into play from that perspective. Otherwise, as the code shows on the screen, we have taken standard anchor elements, which are wrapped inside, unordered list and list item markup, and they have a valid href attribute. Okay. Simple, but very, very effective. After keyboard navigation, the next thing that we are going to talk about is focus visibility. Very important. As a keyboard user, I can navigate to an element, but I can't see where I am. So it is important that the focus indicator is clearly visible. Okay. It helps users understand where they are. Our web pages are filled up with interactive elements, be it links, menus, buttons, forms, etc. Focus indicator helps users understand where they are. They are helpful for people with mobility impairments who rely on a keyboard, and very, very important for people with low vision. Now, people with low vision, there are different, it's a spectrum. So not every person with low vision like me would use a screen reader. Some of them would use a screen magnifier, or some of them might be just using the browser zoom option. Okay, for them who are looking at the screen, who are, viewing the information through their screens, they would need to know where the keyboard focus is at any given point of time. Okay. And in the absence of a visible focus indicator, they would feel lost where exactly they are. Now, to make this happen, okay, again, there are two approaches. Okay. By default, every browser provides a default focus indicator for all the native elements, be it your buttons, links, etc. Okay, don't disable the browser default focus. Okay, if you decide to disable it, you find it very, boring. You find that it does not go well with the design of your web pages. Then, when you are designing for, hover classes, make sure that focus classes are defined as well. Simply disabling the browser focus, default focus, and not defining, the focus class for the interactive elements is very, very, discomforting as far as keyboard users are concerned. So make sure that when you are defining your pseudo classes through CSS for mouse hover, do the same for focus as well. Okay. CSS has lots of different options to make this happen. When you want to do it through pseudo classes, you have the focus pseudo class, old but yet effective. You have the focus hyphen visible and focus hyphen within. These are the new additions, or I could say the latest additions in the pseudo classes, which can be used. When it comes to different CSS properties, we can use the outline property, opacity, and also the outline offset property. Okay. Make sure the outline is not set to 0. Okay. Most of the web pages that we audit, we'll see people would define their outline to be 0. This will disable the default browser focus, and the custom focus is not specified. It won't be visible because outline value is 0. That's one of the common CSS code error that we would come across when we are reviewing a page for focus visibility. Okay. Defining a focus pseudo class is not enough. On top of it, we need to make sure, in order to conform to WCAG, that the focus has sufficient contrast. The requirement as per success criteria 1.4.11 is 3:1. Okay, so when you are designing all these custom focus indicators, make sure that it has a contrast of 3:1 with the adjacent colors. Again, if we talk about the same example on barrier break website, the markup we already had a look at. And when we look at the CSS, the focus class is defined to make sure that the focus is clearly visible when you tap to the links and sub options using your keyboard. Next point, tabbing order. Very important that your visual focus order and your tabbing order are matching. Okay. Easier said than done. Yes. Depending on different design layouts, there are challenges that one often comes across, and one needs to adjust the layout. Here would say at the minimum, one should ensure that the meaning in which a person would navigate through using a keyboard or the sequence is not broken. Okay, so don't let the focus jump from the middle of a section to another block of content. Okay, finish one block and then it should go to the next. Yes, we need to adjust the styles to meet the design requirements, and keep all the stakeholders happy. But it is also important that we don't break accessibility while doing so. When we adjust our layouts using CSS to make sure, the code is correct in the DOM, it is in the correct order. So focus order won't get impacted, but when we visually adjust the elements or, move around the blocks of content, the user experience for keyboard only users and low vision users who are using a keyboard is very, very poor. All of a sudden the focus will jump from one part to another. Okay, so technically in the code order is correct, but visually the visual order will not match with the focus order. Okay. So as we already, understood, the code order is important, but while doing so, make sure that, the focus order is logical. So when there are links, as we saw the example of barrier break website, and the links are, the top navigation, the focus should move from left to right. And when the menu is expanded or the sub options are visible, then the focus should go from top to bottom. Focus should also not go to hidden elements, okay? Because when the focus moves into the hidden territory, it is very disorienting. You don't know what you are landed on and what will be activated if you decide to press enter. After focus order, we're going to talk about keyboard operability. Okay. Keyboard operability, all the elements, all the functionality should be operable with a keyboard. Be it your buttons, be it your drop downs, be it your tabs, be it your sliders, and so on. All of these need to work with a keyboard. Now, all of them have a different interaction pattern. These interaction patterns are standard. And when you look at the ARIA specifications, they have all these interaction patterns defined for different types of interactions, all the standard ones as well as the custom components. When we are looking for keyboard operability, we need to ensure that all the elements are accessible. I can get to a slider, but if I can't change the values of it, okay, people with visual impairments would won't be able to use the slider. They won't be able to operate it. So will be the case for people with mobility impairments. So it is not only important that one can get there, the focus is visible, and the tabbing order is logical, but it is equally important that one can interact with the given control. So when we talk about keyboard operability, okay, again, native elements have all the information or all the functionality baked in. A button is can be operated using the enter key or the spacebar key or even the return key on the Mac side of things. Same is the case for link. Select drop downs. You can have tap to them and use the arrow keys to traverse through the options. When it comes to custom components, we need to make sure that we code for redundant keyboard handlers. Okay? So if you are defining an on-click event for a div, which is used for structuring or coding a button, then it should also have a key press handler as well as a key down handler. Not only this, it should also, the JavaScript should also be coupled with key listeners. Now, on the press of the enter key or the spacebar key, the button should be triggered. The action should be fired. All this is important when we are looking at implementing keyboard access. Next up, focus management. Okay. Very, very important, which with the rich and dynamic interactions that we come across on all websites and web applications these days. Okay. All the 4 points that we spoke about: navigation, focus visibility, tab order, and keyboard operability. All of them need to be taken into account along with focus management in order for a complete and useful experience for keyboard users. So when we talk about focus management, there are different ways to achieve this. Okay. And while we are doing that, again, we need to follow the standard keyboard interaction methods. When we are using non-standard keyboard interaction methods, these have to be documented for. Provide instructions to let users know, let keyboard users know that they can interact with a given component using the given non-standard methods. Now, what all comes into play to make focus management happen? When we talk about focus management, JavaScript comes in heavily. It has a significant role to play. Okay. Along with JavaScript, yes, the keyboard handlers Also, the different techniques that are mentioned in the ARIA specification, like the roving tab index, as well as the ARIA active descent. Okay. We'll see an example for the same as well, so that, we can understand how focus management can be implemented. Now, focus management is going to be different for different type of interactions. Okay, if a modal is triggered, the focus needs to go inside the modal. The focus needs to be tracked inside the modal. Okay, when you close the modal, the focus needs to come back to the triggering element. When you are interacting with a menu, the focus needs to go to the first child element. Okay, or when you're closing the menu, the focus needs to go back to the main menu. Likewise, in the case of a list box, the focus goes to the button element, and from there, users can traverse through the different options using the arrow keys. When we are, interacting with tabbed interfaces, the focus will go to the currently active tab, and all the inactive tabs, can be navigated using the arrow keys. And once you select any of the inactive tabs, then the remaining tabs that will become inactive can be navigated using the arrow keys. Focus management is, yes, different, but not difficult to implement. And when implemented correctly, it enhances the user experience for keyboard-only users, screen reader users, low vision users, switch control users, and even users with who are using voice input. So here is an example of tabs being implemented on a barrier break block. There are different tabs from all to ADA testing, section 508 testing, and so on. Now, all is the active tab, and thus it has the focus, not only programmatically, but also visually. Let's see the markup. We've used the native button tags, which have been given a role of tab. Even though we have used the button tag, you would see we have given tab index 0 for each of these buttons, which have a role of tab. And for the inactive tabs, yes, tab index is -1. Because in a tabbed interface, if all the tabs are tabbable, then it becomes a poor user experience for keyboard-only users. What keyboard-only users are used to, or a standard interaction method for a tabbed interfaces, you can tap to the active control, and from that point onwards, you would use your arrow keys. In a horizontal tab implementation, we'd use the left and right arrow keys. In a vertical tab implementation, it will be up and down arrow keys. Now, it is very important that tab index values from 0 to -1 are toggled between. And this is done with JavaScript and the roving tab index method. So, as we can see in the JS code on the screen, the tab index values are being toggled using the roving tab index method. User focus has been listened to. What are the keys that a user is pressing? And accordingly, the values are getting changed. Now, when we activate from the first tab, when we move to the next tab and activate it, okay, that tab will gain a tab index of 0, and all the other tabs will have a tab index of -1. Last, we'll be talking about testing for keyboard access. We can test both using automated tools and through manual testing. But, would like to repeat this. I'm sure, all of us know this in the accessibility space. Automated testing can only get you to a certain point. Okay, even the best of tools can get you somewhere between 30 to 40% of errors. If you want to capture all the bugs and enhance the user experience, manual testing is the way to go. Here, I'm going to talk about Andy. accessible name and description inspection tool. With the ND bookmarklet, you can look for keyboard errors. Okay. Once ND is installed into the select elements option, we have different options available like links and buttons. We have focusable elements, we have hidden content and tab order indicators. Now we'll use tab order indicators to see, what is the tab order defined and how would different elements receive tab focus and what would be the order. Through links and buttons, we can see if they have been coded using native markup or they have been defined using custom scripts or through spans and divs. And we can then go in and debug further or test further using a keyboard manually. Focus indicators, yes, we need to see the different elements that are focusable and the indicators associated with them. Also the hidden content. Now, what all content is hidden? When focusable or tabbable elements are hidden, your focus indicator will end up in a hidden space, and then it will be a very confusing experience for users. So all this information Andy can easily provide you, and from that you can draw the results or draw further analysis of what needs to be done at the code level to implement keyboard access. When we talk of testing manually, okay, yes, with a keyboard, whether you're using a Windows or Mac or any other operating system, use tab to navigate through links, buttons, select drop downs, text area, tree views, sliders, and so on. Pressing tab will take you in the forward direction. Shift plus tab to take you back. Arrow keys, these will help you traverse through the drop-down options, menus, tree view nodes, adjust the slider values, as well as scroll through the page. Whether you want to scroll horizontally, you can use left and right arrow. You want to scroll vertically, you use up and down arrow. What all will you check for? Yes, we'll check all the content and functionality has keyboard access. We'll check we can navigate to all the interactive elements using a keyboard. We'll see if the navigation, the focus order, the tabbing order is logical. It's not breaking the meaning. We'll see if the focus is visible. It is clearly visible. Okay. If you have not defined the focus, okay, here I would like to add this information. If you have not customized the focus for interactive elements on your web pages, and it's a default browser focus that is visible, and the color contrast is fading in case of default browser focus, it's the responsibility of the browser developers and not you as a web page developer to adhere or address that issue, because obviously it is not in your control. Next, we will check if all the interactive elements are operable with a keyboard, whether these are native elements or custom components. We'll check if the focus is managed correctly. Okay. We'll check if focus does not land up into non-interactive elements. Here, I would like to share a tip with regards to screen reader testing. Many people believe, every element on the page or every piece of content on the page needs to be tabbable. Okay, then only a screen reader user will be able to access it. Then only they will be able to navigate to it, and the screen reader would read the content. Please, please, please don't do that. Okay. It is a poor experience not only for screen reader users, but B, it kills the focus order for keyboard only users as well. Okay, screen reader users have lots and lots of keystrokes to access the content. Just to make sure that the screen reader focus lands on the paragraph, don't give it a tab index of 0. It is non-interactive, and thus it should not be tabbable. With that, we come to the end of the session. from my side. Obviously, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. If you want to chat with me on digital accessibility, you can either shoot me an email at priti.rohra@barrybreak.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Priti Rohra, and as well as on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening, and ready to take any questions if they are.
All right. Well, thank you, Preeti. That was fantastic. So as a reminder for those in attendance, you can enter your questions into the Zoom Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer them in the time that we have. We have a couple of questions in here, Preeti, so I'll start from the top. An individual named Deneb Pulsifer asked a couple of questions, so we'll go one at a time.
Sure.
So first, they asked, as far as keyboard traps go, there are places where these are acceptable. I'm thinking about pop-ups. My question is, what is the best way to let people exit a kind of purposeful keyboard trap in this way? Is the best way a close button? Should it be the escape key? Maybe a combination of both, or an alternative? And are there any problems with doing this?
Thanks, Denef. So yes, in case of pop-ups, in case of Moodles, it is important to trap the focus inside. And if you are giving a close button, if your design includes a close button, then make sure it works with both the close button as well as escape key. As far as escape key is concerned, that's the main key that most users would use to close a pop-up or a Moodle.
Okay, thank you. So next question from same person is, how do you feel about sites that use JavaScript to show the focus ring moving from one focusable element to the next? Is this helpful? Is it distracting? Or is there a better way to keep this super apparent? And then they provided an example of the Van Gogh Museum. So we can take a look at that later.
Sure. So I would say here, I would recommend that we perform user testing to see what is the pulse, or how's the experience for a keyboard only user, a low vision user. We do with a variety of users, and from an accessibility head, I would say if CSS can do it for you, if HTML can do it for you, you don't need to increase your code weight with JavaScript. But there are solutions, lighter solutions available. But I would let users decide here what would they prefer, the JavaScript focus ring, or the default focus visibility.
All right, that's great to know. So next question is, what's the best way to get instructions on keyboard operability to users? I know you mentioned that when there's kind of unique controls, how to communicate that to users. So would you consider a tooltip type message, something else, maybe a message up at the top of the page? I don't know. What would you think?
I would say, whichever method one adapts as per the design, make sure that itself it is keyboard accessible. Believe me, we have come across audits where instructions have been added for the benefit of keyboard users and screen reader users, but those interactions itself are not keyboard accessible. So first of all, make sure those are keyboard accessible. If it is a tooltip, it needs to work with a keyboard. If it is a non-Moodle, again, it needs to work with a keyboard. The decision would largely depend on the design, but if you are starting early, right at the design stage, then obviously please give a brief instruction on the page itself, and then you can provide users with a link or a button to go to the help section or the support section for details. But just giving it under the help section does not necessarily work at all times, because users might not even make a note that there is help available.
Yeah, that's super important. Getting design involved and getting everything involved as early as possible. That's in my experience, that's a huge thing. So that's definitely a great bit of advice. All All right, so the next question here, this one's a little bit more technical, so bear with me. If you change the role of a semantic button to tab, does that mess up the understanding of people on assistive devices on what they can do on that element? Or does the role of tab imply all the same abilities, like enter to select, etc.? I guess this is a question more around keyboard predictability and what roles do to kind of impact that.
Right. So I'll break the question down in pieces. The first part, when you defined the role for a semantic button element, now that is no longer a button for us assistive technology users. Any assistive technology user, that will be a tab. As far as the interaction goes, the second part of it, it will work with enter key. Okay. And generally users, as they are familiar with the standard interaction methods, they would not try the space bar key on a tab. As soon as we hear a tab, we would press the enter key. So that's why it is important, to keep the interactions as standard as possible, so that users are familiarized with that. And if there are any change in the standard methods, then give them instructions about the same.
Great. Yeah, predictability is definitely key when it comes to this sort of stuff. Okay, so last question I have currently, and we have a couple more minutes, so if anybody has any other questions, feel free to drop them in. But this one comes from Beatrice. She says, for the paragraphs of the text in the content, is it mandatory to read them using a screen reader with the keyboard?
Yeah, because if that paragraph has important information, we can read it with a keyboard using arrow keys. We don't need to, as I said, define a tab index of 0 to make sure, the screen reader tab focus lands on that paragraph. We don't need that. So, please don't do that. Okay, that's the advice I'll always give. If it is non-interactive, we can anyways access it with arrow keys. And as a screen reader user, tab is not the only key that we use to access content. We have lots and lots of keystrokes.
For sure. Okay. Yeah. I think that was the last question that we have here. I'll pause for 5 seconds to see if anybody else drops any other questions in. But in the meantime, let me say, Priti, thank you. This was a really great session. And thank you for answering all the questions. And for those of us here, we can continue the conversation on chat or on social media using the hashtag WPA11Y and hashtag WPAD2023. All right, Priti, I think I will relieve you of all of this, and I will go on and talk a little bit about some of the housekeeping stuff. Yep. So those of you attendees, we'd also appreciate it if you go to 2023.wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentation. And while you're there, you can also enter to win a t-shirt. And please stay tuned for building an accessible theme for accessible first sites coming up with Jen Harris at 1 p.m. UTC, translated into whatever your local time zone is. And while you're waiting, please don't forget to visit our sponsors pages to grab a bunch of virtual swag and enter for a chance to win some great prizes. See you all right here at the top of the hour after the break. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jason, for the support.
Thank you to WordPress Accessibility Day 2023 sponsors. Platinum sponsor, Equalize Digital. Equalize Digital's Accessibility Checker plugin is an automated accessibility scanning tool that helps WordPress websites become and stay accessible. Platinum sponsor, Gravity Forms. Gravity Forms is the professional form builder that you need to create beautiful, powerful, and accessible forms. Gold sponsors, 20i, DQ, Empire Caption Solutions, Pressable, and WP Engine. Silver sponsors, CodeGeek, Drake Cooper, GoDaddy, Lone Rock Point, NerdPress, Overnight Website by Kinetic Iris, Riola Networks, A11Y Collective, and The Blogsmith. Bronze sponsors: Accessicart, Green Geeks Web Hosting, Hall Analysis SEO Consulting, HDC, ITX, IvyCat, MetaBox, Pixel Chefs, Simply Schedule Appointments, SiteGround, Termageddon, Underrepresented in Tech, Weglot, and Yoast.